Radio check. Loud and clear.
KSL Sports and KSL Podcast present Mode Push, an American view of F1, starting now.
I'm stuck. This is what you get with this Odyssey.
I'm gutted. I'm absolutely gutted.
I enjoyed this so much. Thank you. Thank you.
Welcome back. It is another edition of Mode Push, an American view of F1, our podcast brought to you by KSL Sports and KSL Podcasts. Alex Kirry, Dan Jimenez in the shop here. And guess what? We're actually in each other's neck of the woods today, and so Dan is in studio. What's up, Dan? Good to see you, man.
Good to see you, too. Thanks for having me.
Man, I don't know what to think. So is it official, Red Bull or officially the Constructors Champions?
Constructors Champions 2023 Red Bull Racing. Yep, it's official.
I mean, because Christian Horner doesn't like to mention that kind of stuff.
No, that's just a Wikipedia thing.
He doesn't like to point it out. All right. So, yeah, they end up winning the Constructors. I don't know, like, how fast is the fastest? It has to be one of the closer versions of winning the Constructors title the quickest, or with how many left, however many races left. Or
yeah.
Things are different with points, I know. And, even though they won 10 races in a row and 12 out of 12 at the beginning, I don't know. It has to be one of the faster ways to get into that championship, right?
Yeah. Last year in Japan is when they sealed up, I think, the driver and the constructors, but it feels like it should have been sealed up earlier this year, but Sergio just hasn't really been on it, right? Like Sergio himself is getting challenged for second in the driver's standings by Lewis. And so you think that they would have had this sealed out at the halfway point, but yeah, it's definitely up there, but I don't think it's a record. I haven't seen a stat come across that says this is the earliest anyone's ever won the Constructors
I'm sure
title.
Helmut Marko loves that. We could have had the championship many more weeks if you would have done your job. I'm looking at this thing too, and I go, Checo. I mean, he had an awful weekend. He had a bad weekend in Japan. When you talk about your teammate comes back out and with all the other so McLaren, this is as good as their car has been all year.
They're on fire.
It was the best they could have done, and they were still 20 seconds off of a guy who is basically I don't know, I assume listening to the music that Stig listens to when he's going around the track on Top Gear. Just chilling out and going around. He's barely talking to any of his engineers. He's just feels good, moves on. But, I mean, Checo, in comparison, is just, he looked so bad. He got, sort of concertinaed at the beginning and ends up just kind of trying to overdo it, overdrive.
He's like a pinball out there, man. He's just bouncing off stuff. Yeah, overdriving is the way that I would describe it for sure. And, yeah, he DNF'd. Well, he DNF'd twice, which is something that we've actually, I don't think ever seen. He DNF'd. They pulled him into the garage, but he had a 5-second penalty for hitting, who was it, Magnussen?
Right, so they had to DNF him?
So there's a loophole, right? The loophole was, if he had stayed in the garage, he was going to have to serve that 5-second penalty next race. And they don't want to do that, right? And so they're like, well, put the car back together and send him back out and serve the 5-second penalty, then bring him back in and won't change anything there. So the stewards let him do it because it technically in the rules it's allowed, but they said that they're going to close that loophole now. It's so they just need to address, I think, the penalty in a different way. But, man, he is all over the place. And, in qualifying, he was 0.8 off of Max, right? Which is, I think second place was half a second, but still, you're in the same car. You can't be 0.8 off of Max at a place like Suzuka.
So Japan gets done. The result wasn't a surprise who the winner was. Are we surprised that McLaren goes 2-3 and that Oscar Piastri just is still – he even said he didn't have a great Sunday. There was some stuff he could work on. His qualifying was out of the freaking world, and he just has been – man, they found a driver lineup right there.
Yeah. Yeah, he was pretty critical on himself, that he could have done better. He had his first podium, amazing. Lando had better pace than him throughout the race, for sure. So I think that's what he was looking at is, he just didn't have the pace. He finished 17 seconds off of Lando. So I think that's what he's looking at when he says he could have done better. But I think he has that mentality of like, yeah, I know I'm a rookie and I should be super stoked about this, but I could do better. So yeah, they have an incredible driver pairing right now, and they seem to be on the up and up. If it wasn't for Max Verstappen and his killer mentality, like they would be challenging for wins for sure.
Well, what has to be fun too is that you look at it and you go, hey, if you're a McLaren fan, you're going to be competing next year. Because everybody's development in the factory right now, there's not a team developing anything for this year, right?
Yeah, I think we've seen our last updates come to the track, so everyone's starting to focus on next year.
So next year has been what they've been working on. I mean, in some of these in a lot of these factories already for a long time. McLaren, you would think, would be aggressive next year. Mercedes obviously is going to make some. I mean, we would assume also that they would just. There's just no version of them being bad for. You know, I mean, and this isn't bad, I guess, but they've certainly been behind the eight ball all season long. Ferrari is starting to figure some stuff out, or at least we kind of felt like it. At least,
yeah.
I don't know, like who is the second best team in F1 right now? Like I know the constructors' titles say one thing, but who really is the second fastest team right now on the grid?
It changes week to week for me. You know, it was last week. It felt like it was Ferrari or maybe Mercedes, and this week or 2 weeks ago in Singapore, it was okay. It's Ferrari. Clearly, and now it's McLaren, clearly. So it's kind of track dependent, which makes for amazing parity and competition, except for the fact that Max Verstappen's not human.
Right.
So without him, it's incredibly competitive. So going into next year, it's kind of feels like a toss-up right now with McLaren having, I think, a lot of momentum on high to medium downforce tracks. They're fifth in the standings, only 50 points behind Aston Martin, who is sucking right now.
They're not doing well.
And I think McLaren is looking at they can catch Aston Martin for sure. Mercedes and Ferrari are a bit more of a stretch. They're 100 points beyond. But you keep stacking up 2s and 3s, second and third place finishes, and you could eat into that gap pretty quickly. So I think what's interesting right now to watch, now that we know the Constructors' Championship is wrapped up and the Driver Championship is pretty much all wrapped up, it's the fight for second place in the Constructors between Ferrari and Mercedes is what I think is interesting, and how much can McLaren catch up. And then on the driver's side, it's can Lewis catch Sergio? I mean, if Lewis finishes second, and if he beats Sergio out in the Drivers' Championship with the car that Sergio has, that's almost the story of the year for me.
Interesting.
I think no one thinks
about like the drivers' standings and goes, yeah, but who was number 2?
Right.
It's like no, this in more than any other sport, like we will forget about you. No one cares who was second in the constructors. No one cares who's second.
No one will remember.
But in this case, there will be a massive storyline for the wrong reason for Checo, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, and I guess it speaks to the consistency of, because we all wrote off. I think we wrote off Mercedes at some point
early in the season.
At the very early of the season, and we did the same with McLaren. Mercedes had a quicker bounce back, obviously, but McLaren has figured it out in the last little while. And so, but Aston Martin, those guys, they had such a quick start. Did they have 7 podiums in a row at the beginning, and then they just haven't been?
Yeah,
or maybe they went 6 and then had a couple races and then got a podium, but.
Yeah, at the beginning of the season,
nowhere to be found.
Yeah, like 6 months ago, rewind, we're like, is Aston Martin going to challenge for the championship? And is McLaren going to go out of business? Like, they ran, I think, 19th and 20th in the first race.
Yeah.
It's the turnaround, good and bad, between these teams has been pretty wild. So, yeah, I just don't know what's going to happen going into next year, other than Max is still probably going to dominate. But beyond that, it's super competitive.
We've had such wild, since the new regulations in 21 was the first year.
22.
Or 22 was the first year of regulations. So we've only had a year. This is the second year of it. And we saw such a big gap. Red Bull had just put themselves so far ahead. Is there a chance that you just see another team just absolutely even leapfrog Red Bull? Or why is it that it takes so long to develop, for time to actually be put on the timing sheet to make up for, maybe some lack of engineering? So
Yeah. There's a cycle to it, right? So new regulations come out, and then it kind of everything gets thrown up into the air, and it's who can put together the pieces the fastest on the design philosophy for the car. Red Bull put it together the fastest, and everyone's gravitating towards that. So I do think that going into next year, I think the longer you keep the regulations the same, the more competitive it is. And we saw that in 2021. We had the same regulations for a really long time, and Max and Lewis went down to the very last lap. We had parity, we had competition, and then we changed the regulations for the sake of competition and made it worse. So I think as time goes along, 2024, 2025 will get more competitive, and then in 2026 we have new engine regulations and rumors of making the cars more narrow and shorter and lighter, which is what all the drivers and teams are asking for to making the racing more fun. So we'll see what happens that year. Can somebody jump the gun quicker? But I'm looking forward to more competitive seasons in the next 2 years.
So we get a week off. Then they head to Qatar, a.k.a. Qatar, however you want to say it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? They go to the Losail International Circuit. They've never raced there, right? Is this the first race they've done there?
I think we had one race like in 2019.
It might have been 19. Was it the COVID year maybe?
I think when COVID hit is when they canceled it, and we didn't have it for 3 years when we should have. So I think we've only raced there once, and I think Lewis won the race.
Oh, that's a shock. Back in 2019.
I know, right? Yeah.
Right? Well, so you go. We the whole grid goes to Qatar. Then you have the U.S. GP 2 weeks after that. Mexico the week after that. Sao Paulo the week after that. Another week break, and then it comes to Vegas. Have you figured out if you're going to go or no? As it gets closer, you're kind of like.
As it gets closer, I'm like, I feel like we really should be there.
It's going to be $48.
Yeah, I've got a set of friends, some high roller friends, and they're probably listening to the podcast. But they seem to they're putting the pressure on me to want to go, and they've got a place. I just got to fork out the ticket.
Oh, they have a place?
They have a place to stay.
They have another place for another.
I'm sure. Yeah. So we just got to find some tickets that aren't ridiculously expensive.
I'm willing to. They're going to be ridiculous. So stop.
Mm-hmm.
We're just going to have to figure it out. I'm all for it. So if we want to look, here's what we'll do. We'll save money by you driving.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Well, we could do the thing too. Look, we can stay at my place in St. George.
Yeah, we'll take my highly fuel efficient Toyota Tacoma. They get 16 miles of the gallon and save some money.
See, that's when you and I have to get in the Volkswagen Golf.
Yes, there you go. That's better.
We hit the road for 50 miles a gallon, no problem. So what I'm saying is we still have 2 U.S. Grand Prix out of the next 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 races. 2 of them are going to be in the U.S. That's pretty crazy, and we've already had one in the U.S. this year.
I think the Austin race is underrated. It had a lot of passes last year. I think it doesn't gather the attention that Miami and Las Vegas does because it's just not in a metro area. It's out in the middle of nowhere in Texas. But I think as a track experience, I think that is next on my list of wanting to go see because I think you can see a lot of action in a weekend. So if I'm going to be out of town that weekend already, if I wasn't going to be, I'd almost be more wanting to go out to Austin and see that race versus Vegas. There's a lot of tech
people in Austin. You need to kind of feel the area out.
That's right. Yeah, I got to go network and then network my way into the paddock.
Absolutely. This is some. So let's throw the racing aside for just a moment because you found something that I think is really fascinating, and that is, first of all, when you get into following F1, like when I got into it early, I was like, these cars are expensive, but all you hear about is, oh no, it's crazy expensive. This is space age stuff. Like they're using these things to basically, it's all one-off parts. It's all crazy machined. It's very spec. Insane stuff that you don't use. It's one-off, one-purpose things. Mm-hmm. So that in itself, it creates its own. It's going to be expensive. Number 2, the materials that are used is the highest quality that they can use, and the most expensive they can use because they're also trying to save for weight, and also have just like an insane amount of reliability, which we've seen pay off. I mean, I think we can all kind of look around and go, I've never seen an F1 car this reliable. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that maybe those V10s were. I have no clue. I don't recall following it. But I mean, like, is there an era where the car was more reliable than it is now?
Doesn't seem like it. Max hasn't had a single issue this year, right? A reliability issue. I think Sergio's have all been self-inflicted. And I think you look across the grid, and I think the top 3 or 4 teams have had really good reliability, and there's been some really bad ones. Like, 2 races in a row, Yuki didn't even start the race.
For sure.
So there are issues still out there, but yeah, it is a pretty reliable platform right now.
So all that comes with a price. Everything costs a lot of money. Whenever you see cars crash, I think we take for granted the fact that, there's a guy on the team who will probably really start crying. Not just because they made the part maybe with their own hands. But like when they talk about the guys back at the factory, that poor guy who put that nose together and the amount of work. I mean, if we got inside the nose, the electronics and all the things that go, because it looks like just a click, click, like you're putting on a sock or something when they just change that nose out. But you know that there's intense stuff in there.
Yep.
A chassis on an F1 car costs about $700,000 to make.
Mm-hmm.
Let me see here. The gearbox is about $380,000 on an F1 car.
Just the gearbox.
The front wing and the rear wings combine for about $250,000 total.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and that looks like just a bunch of carbon fiber shaped into like a little wing, maybe with some, some stuff on there. But $250,000 there. The engine is about $10.5 million on each one of these cars.
It's crazy.
So the cars themselves are about $20 million a piece.
Yeah.
After everything is told. That's not even the amount of man hours that go into producing.
Yeah, those are the hard costs.
Those are just the hard costs of how much that part costs. Okay. So this guy on Reddit, on the F1 subreddit, did a perfect thing that you pointed out, and that is a breakdown of the Constructors Drivers' Championship. It's not a good list to be at the top of, right?
No, you don't want to win this.
How does this work? So, so he actually put some of the parts on there as well. How much these things probably should cost, because of a regular chassis is about $700,000. An additional one is $275,000. I don't know why it's so much less, but maybe it's just I don't know. Maybe they use. I'm trying to think why the second one would be less, but you can imagine too, because they do take 2 cars per. They have 4 cars that go with them to the tracks, don't they?
Yeah,
or at least some version of a put together almost of 2 separate cars.
Yeah, it's funny because this week they got Williams got into trouble because after Logan wrecked and they had to like rebuild his car for the race, they had like a 3rd car ready, but it was like 2 ready. It was 2 put together and they got penalized. That's why Logan had to start from the pit lane.
Oh, wow.
It was like the dumbest penalty in the world. I don't understand why. There's just
so
a
they
rule,
potentially rolled up with 5 cars or 6 cars.
There's a rule against having like a 3rd car prepped. It's like stuff needs to be in part bins, and then okay, if your chassis is good, then put it together. Anyways, it's kind of a weird rule, but these guys take backup components, and I think they have 1 backup chassis to share between the 2 cars.
Oh, the monocoque, which is just where the driver's sitting, essentially, $700,000. That's insane, because that's almost the most expensive part beside the engine. Now, when they wreck a car, the engine's not totally obliterated, although it can be.
Yeah, it depends on how hard you hit.
So the one who leads the way on most damage done also happens to be one of the guys who has 0 points, which is a definite no-no when you come to this thing, when it gets to this sport. Logan Sargent, number 1 on the list of how much he's actually damaged on cars. Almost $4 million worth of damage for Logan.
And what is that, a multiple of his salary? Is that 4 times his salary, 8 times his salary?
I think he's $1 million. Didn't we look at him?
He
was like
a year?
$750 or $1 million. I think there's almost nobody who gets paid less than $750 or $1 million.
But no matter what, you don't want to wreck more than you get paid, right? Like that is a bad signal.
He doubled it in one race, the Hungarian race, where he basically totaled the car. It was worth $1.5 million of damage.
Yeah, it's crazy. Up until Hungary, he was doing okay. And I remember thinking that, like, hey, he's actually kept it on the track. It's not that bad. But he's had a stretch in the last 4 races where he's just shot up to the top of the standings by a large margin. And this last race in qualifying when he wrecked in Q3, that was the moment and when I was like, it's done. He's not getting re-signed, because it was so just driver induced, like just a weird error to make. It was in a corner that like nobody ever wrecks in,
right?
And it just seemed like he was almost in his head.
Yeah, and these costs matter. They go, hey, we're Williams, we're not Mercedes.
Mm-hmm.
The cost cap is real. We have to stay with it, because wrecking the car, where does that land in the cost cap? I mean, that's inside of it. So if you're costing them, then strategically, you're not just not helping the team out, you're actually sending them in a backward. I mean, just an absolute disadvantage.
Yeah, it hurts Albon too, because parts that were going to be saved and used on Albon's car now have to get put on Logan's backup. And so it slows development time down. You only have so many of like the new and improved developments that you bring to the racetrack. You only develop so many for the rest of this year, and so if Logan keeps wrecking stuff, then that's going to hurt the whole team. So
if another team crashes into another, do they actually call him? Do they send him a bill?
No.
They don't call their insurance?
No. Yeah. Could you imagine how much the insurance premium would be on an F1 car?
Look, I would imagine that if NASCAR were like this, instead of approaching each other in the pit lane and punching each other out, just approach each other in the pit lane.
Yeah.
And hand them your
check.
No, just hand them like your USAA, number.
Yeah,
and
call
say,
my
hey,
agent.
Sorry about that. That was my fault. Put a note on the car. Sorry, I ran you into the wall.
In NASCAR, I had heard stories of like gentleman drivers who were like, "Hey, I did a boneheaded thing, and I'm going to send a check."
Right.
And they're friends with the other owner, and they know how much it's going to cost them. But that was kind of few and far between.
That's almost a given too. That if you are that guy who comes in, he's just the guy with the big pocketbook, and you're basically paying your way in to drive, and you've earned your way in sort of on skill, but a lot on paying. It's like, yeah, but if you do break it, like, let's fix it somehow, or at least make up for it for a sponsorship over here or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
So Logan Sargent, by far and away, like by 70%, is the worst in terms of the money, almost $4 million. Lance Stroll second, doesn't bode well for the kid.
No.
Sergio Perez is third, and again, not that Red Bull cares this year because they're going to walk away with a few $100 million on top of everything, but that's the kind of stuff that Helmut Marko and Christian Horner look at and go, that's reason number 97 that we're going to kick number 11 to the curb at some point. I mean, he gets all through next year?
Yeah, next year is his contract year.
So he's third in destructing the car, and that's a reliable car. It's just bad driving or just over driving, like we've been talking about.
Yeah, he totaled it in Monaco when everyone got to see the floor. Then Hungary, he wrecked it again. Everyone got to see the floor again. Then in the last few weeks, he's just had like race incidents. Monza, he wrecked it in qualifying. Yeah, these are just unforced errors again. So yeah, $2.5 million in damages for Sergio is not good when Max is last on the list at $220,000.
$220,000. That's like barely a wing and another wing.
Azerbaijan, $95K. I'm trying to remember what happened to him in Azerbaijan.
What about when just one of those end plates goes?
That's probably it. It's probably an end plate that got clipped somewhere, and he had to come and get a new nose.
Awful. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Okay. But you notice a trend here. The bottom of the ones who've done the least amount of damage. I'll start from these are the sixth. I'll go eighth. Let's go up to the 8 lowest. Tell me if you see something in common here. Nico Hulkenberg 8, Kevin Magnussen 7, George Russell 6, Lando Norris 5, Valtteri Bottas 4, Lewis Hamilton 3, Fernando Alonso 2, and Max Verstappen 1.
I was gonna say experience.
Yes,
except for George and Lando is kind of getting there too.
Yeah, but also experience and probably the actual most skilled drivers on the grid, right? Minus maybe because Sainz and Leclerc both are kind of middle of the pack. They've done quite a bit of damage, 3 million total for Ferrari. But like that might also just point to the fact that they maybe aren't as good, right? But I mean, like we look at Max Verstappen as being the best maybe ever at some point. Fernando Alonso, what do we call it? He's like wily, experienced. Like he doesn't make really any bad moves. Lewis is Lewis. Valtteri is also just a conditioned, like he's a robot, like he just doesn't crash that often. So yeah, Lando and George would be kind of the ones that you would put in there. But those guys are on their teams because they're considered like top talent for being maybe as young as they are. So
yeah. I would have liked to have seen this chart last year and maybe it exists
probably does.
For Mick Schumacher, because that was the big thing, that Mick was wrecking the cars a bunch, and we were talking about how he was costing Haas in a big way. And so I wonder how much, especially as a function of his salary, Mick was an interesting rumor or interesting piece of news that I had heard is that apparently Toto sent Mick Schumacher's simulation data to James Vowles, who's the team boss at Williams, and said, "You need to replace Logan with Mick." And I guess James Vowles looked at it and said, "No thanks."
Interesting.
And I wonder if it's like, was he just not quicker than Logan, or was he not quicker than whoever else James Vowles is looking at? Could it be could they steal Liam Lawson for a year? Like, I don't know who he's thinking.
Yeah.
But they haven't extended Logan, and I will be surprised if they do. It's a bummer because we obviously want an American on the grid. But, yeah, I thought that Mick Schumacher, if Mick can't get a seat at Williams, I don't think he gets a seat in anywhere.
And then at some point, they just don't just like hand him out after a couple of years. It's almost like you better find your way in after being out maybe 2 or 3 seasons. After that,
we never think of you. Yeah, you're Latifi at that point.
You're Latifi at that point. Hey, speaking of Latifi, it was Mick Schumacher who led F1 last year, almost $4 million. Logan Sargent's almost there right now.
Yeah, he's approaching that level
with 8 races left, dude. With 8 or 9 races left. Or 6 maybe. Either way, Mick Schumacher was just under $4 million, but the problem was he did $2.5 million on one race in Saudi Arabia. He
that's when he completely totaled the car. I think
totaled the car.
Like
it was just the monocoque just like spinning in the.
Oh yeah, that's like when his car split in half.
Totally. Yes.
Yeah.
It looked bad. Latifi's right there too. He's $3.4 million last year. He did it in a span of 2 races, basically. Saudi Arabia and Australia, both over $1 million crashes that he had. And look, Williams is one thing. Haas can definitely not afford a $4 million, taking a hit. And luckily, Kevin Magnussen kind of made up for it with only $500,000. But last year, Bottas and Verstappen and Magnussen were all the lowest. So you get your return on investment with Max because he just barely breaks anything on on that car. But yeah, they have the totals up here. So they have previous champions of the most.
Oh no.
Okay. Albon in 2019 did $5.5 million.
Really? Maybe that was when he was at Red Bull and he got canned. Yeah.
Grosjean, 3.1.
Yeah.
How dare you though? that fiery crash was basically $2.5 million of that $3 million.
Honestly, the fiery crash in a way is like the best thing that ever happened to him because that's all that anybody remembers him for is like the man who walked out of the fire. I mean, it's incredible, right? You go back and you watch it and you still can't believe he lived.
Right.
But before that, he was the dude that wrecked on the first corner of the first lap every race. Like that was his reputation. But now he's over in IndyCar and he takes people off over in IndyCar because he runs into people and drives rough. But
so in 21, it was him and who was racing in 21 for Haas?
Roman.
Oh boy.
And it was Kevin, right?
No, was it the Russian kid for that 1 year?
Oh yeah, it was Mazepin.
Mazepin. So that year was the most that they've had in the modern era at almost $8 million of damage for Haas that year.
Oh man. Yeah, having Roman and Mazepin as your 2 drivers, good grief. The Russian DJ. You just love Mazepin went and became a DJ. Yeah. Lance says he's going to go play tennis. De Vries going to get his MBA at
you're already signing
Harvard.
You're already signing off Stroll as being out.
Well, that's what he said. Is like there was something about him wanting to go be on the PGA tour, or not PGA, but the ATP.
Oh my gosh.
De Vries Gotifi is he's doing his MBA at like Oxford or something, or London Business School or something. I think
it's either that or he's a Canadian guy. Maybe it's like McGillis or something. They're Harvard, right?
Yeah. So I still think that Lance's future is team management and taking over for his dad.
If you're Latifi, this was your anti-hero story. Your time in F1, right?
Yeah.
Your villain story. Because then he goes off and gets it because his dad's already a cajillionaire. He leverages that. He becomes the bad guy billionaire.
Yeah.
Who comes in, swoops in, just buys these people up. And goes, I own 3 F1 teams, and I will kick out everybody who had anything to do with me ever being out of the sport.
I really hope Latifi becomes like our next generation's Lawrence Stroll. Just like he's back for vengeance.
With even more ego. Even more just like vitriol of like having to get back at the guys he's just gonna pick off people. It's like the guy on Happy Gilmore. No, it's not Happy Gilmore. It's Billy Madison.
Oh yeah,
who has the list of people he's gonna put some makeup on, crosses off Billy Madison for being a nice guy to him. There you go. Okay, we do have a couple weeks until another race here. I don't know anything about the Qatari race just because it's a place they've only been to one time, and we're not really familiar with it. I would just assume it's going to be a high deg and high speed course because it's going to be relatively hot.
Yep.
And they're going to have to figure this thing out. By the way, a set of tires, Pirelli tires, what do you think they would be?
That's a good question. I don't know.
Those things are massive, by the way, when you get up next to them.
I'm going to guess like $80,000 a set.
How about $2,800 a set?
Whoa.
Like we should go in on some. In fact, I was on eBay. You can find...
It's like... That's not much more than like
I know.
like P0s for your
your regular old car. Well, a regular old car with a P0 would be kind of funny. But yeah, I mean, I did tires on my Suburban like last month for $1,200.
Man, I was way off. I was an order of magnitude off. That's crazy.
I just assumed that Pirelli's going to be like, yes, it is $80,000.
I know. I'm sure they could charge what they want.
Maybe it wasn't. I looked, it said a set. So I was thinking maybe it was going to be per tire. I could see maybe $3,000 a tire.
Yeah.
You can go on, by the way, you can go on eBay and get like a used
ones. Oh my gosh.
Well, they make it at tables. There's like a they put a little lucite top on it. That's kind of a fun conversation starter for the basement right there.
Give your house a distinct smell, I'm sure.
But here's the problem is that I would get just a one-off tire. I'd buy it. My kids would roll it down it'd go down the stairs.
Turn it into a tire swing or something.
It would go down the stairs in 2 seconds, put a big old hole in the drywall at the bottom. There you go.
That's awesome.
As we get ready for the rest of the season here, looking to see, I think that I did read Max does wrap up the title this weekend. Or this next weekend, because this is going to be, Cotter's going to be a sprint race. Race. If he gets 6th or better in the sprint race, he's the world champion.
Oh, okay. He can wrap. How weird would it? That's going to be weird to wrap up a championship after a sprint.
No, man.
Yeah.
You need to sit out.
Yeah.
And the sprint's great because now it doesn't actually. That's not the qualifying.
Right. Yeah. So he doesn't need to risk it.
Don't do it. Hang out and go thumbs up in the crowd and pull yourself into the garage for the sprint. Although I'm saying that he would never do it because he's an insane competitor.
Yeah.
And he'd still try to win first place. But I want it to be won in a real race. I don't want it to be in a sprint race.
Yeah. No, I don't. Yeah. I'm with you there. That'll be kind of weird.
6th place or better, he would be the world title winner. All right. That's another one in the books for us. So Dan Jimenez, Alex Kirry, we appreciate you joining. If you don't if you know some people who you definitely want to tell about the podcast, we would love for you to do so. We put this thing together as a labor of love, and we hope that you love racing as much as we do. So, Dan, thanks for coming up, man. We appreciate you coming to the studio.
My pleasure.
We'll be back again at it next week as we get you ready for, or the week after, I guess, if we talk about when the racing is actually going to happen. Stay with us. Stay tuned. Download the podcast, and tell a friend and teach a neighbor that F1 is really a fun sport to watch. And you don't have to give up any football watching time, by the way. No. Almost ever.
You just have to set your alarm really early or go to bed really late if you want to watch it live.
Look, as soon as those Pac-12 After Dark games finished, I was like, now we've got
F1.
The Japanese GP, baby. All right. For Dan and Alex, we'll see you next time, everybody.